We divide the market into what we would call the formal industry and the informal industry. Now, according to our information, there's about 40,000 formal certified coaches in Africa that would say that they're certified, they're working in employment, that you can actually verify and check up, where they're working and their certificates. Now, interestingly enough, the informal market is bigger than a million. There's more than a million coaches in Africa, but they're operating in the Wild West.
Hello and welcome back to Hashtag Fitnessindustry. My name is Andreas Bechler and I'm your host, author and consultant for the fitness market, mainly based in Germany. In our previous episodes, we analyzed the dynamics across Europe, and we also took a deep dive into the resilient Spanish-speaking giants of Latin America and also into Brazil. Today, we are setting our sights on a continent that global investors are increasingly calling the final frontier of fitness growth. We are looking at Africa. When international brands look at the African continent, they often see a massive demographic wave, but they struggle to understand, from my opinion, the regional nuances. It is a market that spans from the highly consolidated commercial chains to rapid grassroots developments. To tap into this potential, the market needs structure, unified education, and a deep appreciation for local culture. To help us separate the hype from the reality on the ground, I'm joined today by an expert for the African fitness ecosystem. He's a pioneer with over 25 years of industry experience, the co-founder of Safari Fitness and the chairman of FIT Africa International, the governing body driving accreditation and standardization across the continent. Welcome to the show, Akinola. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. What a wonderful introduction. I'm honored to be here on the program. One of the first English language podcasts that you're doing. And thank you so much for having us, Andreas.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. And like I already told you before our production here, I'm very unfamiliar with the African fitness market, so it will be also very interesting today for me to hear about this big continent with its big potential also for fitness, from my opinion. But first, let's take a look at yourself, take a look about you as a person. Could you briefly introduce yourself and to share the core mission behind FIT Africa International?
Yes, of course. I suppose I should go back and sort of mention my own personal education in terms of studying. I'm about close to 60 years old now. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria. And when I was about 10 years old, I traveled to the UK and I studied most of my secondary school and university education in the UK. I did spend a little bit of time in America to do an MBA. And then finished it off all in the UK. So most of my education upbringing was actually in the UK, but I'm actually Nigerian. So I'm actually dual citizen. I'm both Nigerian and UK citizenships. So I suppose I do have a degree in physics, a master's in business. So in terms of education, Africans have, especially Nigerians, but generally Africans in total, we do hold high value on what we call formal education, which would be school and then university. But interestingly enough, there was a misnomer and a misknowledge about what we would call in the Western world vocational education. There wasn't structured vocational education, especially in fitness type industries. So coming from a background that had a more formalized education, I suppose I did see the gap between that and vocational education. So I suppose, do you want to just make me introduce myself and the core missions? So as I said, yeah, I'm Akinola Maja. I'm married. I've got 4 kids. Our youngest is 25 and she has special needs. So that has somehow actually changed myself and my wife in terms of our attitude to life and in terms of what you would call, I suppose maybe that was the reason why I can look at minute details like a qualification framework. Because talking about masters, all our other kids have master's degree, but our youngest, the smaller milestones were really big things when she was growing up. So, in terms of our personal side of that, as I said, we have 4 kids, no grandchildren yet, but hopefully soon. And I'm actually a businessman. I'm into the fitness industry. Obviously, I've been in that for about 25 plus years. I'm also into the property market, into real estate in Africa, particularly, mostly Nigeria and Kenya. And my wife is the fitness professional. So about 15 years ago, we moved back to Nigeria, more for the property side of things. My wife was a professional in fitness, so we sort of started to grow a fitness business. In fact, technically, I started working for my wife because she was doing so well. And we then started off with her being a fitness instructor. We've had staff, so we were running fitness classes all over Lagos in particular, and then onto Nigeria. And then we started expanding, where we started to license dance fitness instructors across all of Africa and Europe. Specifically, that we had a couple of instructors outside of the main 2 markets, like in the Cayman Islands, but most of the bulk of our licensed instructors were in Europe and in Africa. And then everyone has a COVID story. During COVID, we started to look at the educational side of things because, as I mentioned in our pre-warm-up, when we were licensing an instructor in Hungary, we have a rule where if you're a licensed program, I shan't name other names, but we all know who the licensed programs are. You are supposed to be certified as a fitness instructor before you can become licensed in a specialty program. So in Europe, it was easier to double check that. It was a lot harder to get certified instructors already. So we would have to look at a lot of other type of factors before they could become licensed as a Safari Fitness instructor. So with that in mind, obviously during the COVID times, we were working quite closely, myself and my wife, and our business partner who's based in Belgium, Umar, and my wife is Patricia. We started to work with Dr. Janet Chumba from University of Nairobi to do online sessions where we started to do courses like Principles of Fitness Trainer, and lots of other mini courses where we were doing. We did them for about 2 years actually during lockdown, and that kind of grew to what is called Fit Africa today. Now, one of the major, I would call it a sacrifice that we made was that being trainers ourselves, for the sake of conflict of interest, we had to pause, virtually stop our own personal training in our own company for Safari Fitness. So since 2019, we actually haven't actually conducted any training sessions of our own because you can't, if you were to create, well, we'd never really wanted to create what is the governing body today, but you can't be a trainer and be the accreditor at the same time and be building a system where in effect you're competing against your partners. So one of the very first decisions we made was Fit Africa International doesn't do training ourselves. Even though we have the capacity and the capability of doing it, we actually set that rule for ourselves to reserve no conflict of interest. So we don't do training ourselves, our partners do the training. And that was one of the core things where I think has helped us to today. So we had to separate Safari Fitness from Fit Africa International, even though we're co-founders of both organizations. And though times have obviously changed, and we are actually looking to restart Safari Fitness training. And the first one will actually take place, I think, in August in Thailand, of all places, because we were going to train outside of our two core markets. So that's a little bit of ourselves, our background, and I think we can possibly go on to the next sections in terms of your questions and what you want. I hope that gives a rounded.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your introduction. Very interesting to see that you're also kind of living between the continents, yeah, with your experience in especially UK, but of course on the other side,
When I get
living.
asked that question, when we meet people at conferences and they ask, where do you live? I say 4 countries. And they go, what? So I'm based in Nigeria, Kenya, UK, and in Turkey as well. So
Okay, Turkey
that
also
gives
on the
us,
map. Okay.
yes. So that's my link to Asia, my link into Asia.
Okay, very interesting. I think it will be very interesting now to have these different points of view when we look now at the African market. And let's break down the landscape because Africa, I would say, is obviously not a monolith. Yeah, we can take a look about perhaps when we look at the north, there's the rapidly accelerating hubs like Egypt or your own home market, Nigeria in the West, or if we take a look for South Africa, yeah, which I would say is widely considered at a highly major pioneer market with dominant chains and perhaps, but you can tell that better, I think, from my opinion, I would say perhaps the most developed fitness market on the continent. But yeah, we can see also from the data for 25 and 26 that there is a specific engines driving the continent's industry, like all these countries. And perhaps let's look at your perspectives as the chairman of a Pan-African governing body. How does these regions compare? And what are the biggest challenges when it comes to standardizing qualifications across so many different countries?
Thank you so much for this question. It's really, really important. Yeah, let's break it down. Africa is definitely not a monolith. It's 54 separate countries. And whilst English might be the main language, you've got quite a sizable chunk of French-speaking uh, Africa, and then some other places like Angola that speak Portuguese. So you do have the language issues. And then obviously you're talking about the actual local languages as well. Even within countries, there we speak different languages altogether. For example, in Nigeria, we would have 3 main languages to speak. So there's 54 countries. The easiest way to do it is news, north, east, west, south. But actually, we do have to count Central Africa as a distinctly separate region as well. So North Africa, East Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa, and then Central Africa. That's how you split the regional basis. Some parts of Central can actually be on West. Some parts of Central Africa can be towards the east, and parts of it are actually, so it sits in between all 4, but we have to look at it as a different region altogether because all the regions have different standards, different paces. Yes, first of all, you got to look at Africa as you can also split it another way. You can what we would call sub-Saharan Africa. That would be west to east and taking in part of central. So that's what we would call sub-Saharan Africa. Then you've got your northern Africa, and in a lot of cultures, they're culturally very similar to the Middle East Arabic. They do speak a lot of Arabic. So you got to look at it that as another block. And then Southern Africa is a separate block altogether as well. So when we were building Fit Africa, just by coincidence, obviously being Nigerian from West Africa, we did start with sub-Saharan Africa and built from West Africa, connected it to East. Then we went to North, and then we did South Africa last. As you mentioned, obviously that being the most mature market. So that was the way it had to be done, by joining up the different regions through what we would call the FAQF, which is the Fit Africa qualification framework. So we can talk about that a little bit further, if you wanted to. So basically, the FAQF, the way we actually built an FAQF is that anywhere in the world, a university degree is a level 6 qualification. Yeah. A master's degree is a level 7, PhD doctorate is a level 8. And then a higher diploma is a level 5. What we would call, we're getting into the vocational industry qualifications now, what we would call a personal trainer is traditionally a level 4 qualification, and a fitness instructor would usually fall into a level 3. Now, level 1 and level 2 are what we would call trainees, CPD, continuous. Level 1s are usually continuous, and level 2 qualifications are usually what you would call trainees or assistant qualifications. So, generally speaking, to work in the industry, you would need a level 3 qualification, and then you would progress to a level 4 or level 5. But we've built the qualification framework at the starting point of knowing that there's an anchor point that anywhere globally, a university degree is a level 6 qualification. And so that was our anchor point. Incidentally, we started off in the fitness industry just to complicate matters even further. We did branch into 7 what we called interlinking industries. So fitness, health, wellness, beauty, creative arts, sports, and longevity. We call them interlinking because you need to be fit to be a sports person. If you're fit, you're well, or beauty. So they all have some element of fitness within them, but much like fitness, they work according to the same qualification framework. So where we can, once you build a qualification framework for fitness, you can actually do the same thing for a sports coach, for example. So that's how we actually built the qualification framework. And then what we needed to do was to reach out to as many, in the first instance, as many local providers in Africa, and what we would call, technically, what we call the diaspora. So from our previous background, we knew we had a lot of contacts in the industry. So leveraging upon our contacts, we were able to reach out to as many training providers and partners. So we call today accredited training partners, ATPs. Now in Europe, they're usually called RTOs or RTPs, registered training organization or registered training providers. So we call those an ATP. So in partnership with partners, training providers, we started to look at what it would mean to get a level 3 qualification. What was the standards, for example, in the US, in Europe, in Australia, how many hours of training would be needed to achieve this? Now, obviously, the issues that we had was that in Africa, some of them couldn't take the amount of time out to actually do the qualification. For example, in Europe or in Australia, to do a level 3 qualification is usually roughly about 200 hours of training. So the only way I describe it, I always use this example. There's chicken and there's chicken. There's chicken that has been reared what we would call on the farm, and there's agricultural chicken where it has been pumped with water. So we looked at the courses and we took out as much bloat, because in the industry today, there's a lot of home training and self-regulated hours in terms of those training. So we were able to look at it and cut it down to 80 hours of what we would call, we started to look at outcome rather than just training for training's sake. We were more interested in the outcome of the training that could be proven. We also looked heavily into experience. So we didn't just take hours of training to build the system. So we looked at a lot of different factors in terms of the training of a person. But in terms of the courses themselves, they're very, very formulaic in terms of the amount of hours of training, in terms of the outcomes, and what we would expect a training provider to do for level one, level two, level three. So once that was done, a lot of international partners started reaching out to us, that they were also interested in getting accreditation in the African market, because as was mentioned in your introduction, Africa is seen to be the last frontier. I'll come back to a very interesting statistic I was told very recently. Um, so we started to partner with international partners. Now, when that actually happened, for example, earlier on I mentioned about in Australia, it's possibly about 200 hours for a level three qualification, while in Africa it was about 80. So what we said is we do a minimum of 80 hours, but we don't have a maximum that a training provider can do to get that qualification, because we know that you could decide to do it in 80 hours, you could decide to do it in 150 hours or 200 hours. That's entirely up to the training provider themselves to determine the number of hours that they would want to do their course in. But what we did is that we have minimum hours of training that we would expect anyone to meet, and then there's no upper threshold. So in terms of the regional structures, in terms of the regions, because we decided not to build the organization like concentrated in one region. It's better. I would describe it. We built it wide and shallow to begin with. It was better to have 5 or 10 or 50 people in one country than 500, for example. So when we started to build, we were more interested in the number of countries that we were able to get members in. So the second part was to register what we would call coaches today. There was a time where people were using different ways to describe themselves, whether it was fitness instructor or trainer or coach. But we collectively, we came upon the idea that we would use the word coach as a title. Because, for example, in sport, in the French-speaking Africa, they would call themselves sports coachif. And so fitness instructor, if you translated fitness instructor into French, it made no sense to them in terms of their market. So in the way that you would use the title doctor or engineer or any other titles, we decided collectively to call ourselves coaches. That way, there was a word that brought us all together, whether we were French speaking, English speaking, whether different countries culturally. So that word coach has become very, very, very important. Funny enough, we were meeting some coaches the other day, and they would like, if anyone calls them a fitness instructor, they will refuse to answer them now. You have to call me coach. So that was a very, very important thing that we actually did as well. So we started to register coaches in different countries. Now, we say Africa and the diaspora because there are a lot of Africans outside of Africa. So that's what we would call the diaspora. So as of today, but then we never, it wasn't a closed system. It wasn't that, oh, you have to be African or you have to be black or to be part of our organization. From my own background, I'm a bit of an international citizen. My wife is Anglo-Indian. I'm mixed Nigerian myself. I've lived and studied and worked in different countries. So we had an open door policy. So we've grown to, as of now, 67 different countries where we can actually say we've actually got a member in of our organization, a coach in, or a training provider. So when we built with that very wide base, it was then a lot easier to build up from a very wide base. And that's how we were able to capture Africa. Because when we first started, people went, and I used to fly, across Africa, and we would see how big the map is and how massive a task is. And people used to say, "Oh, what part of Africa are you from?" And I would say the whole of Africa. And it would seem like crazy. No, it's not possible. But slowly but surely, I mean, obviously, it's not something that we did by ourselves. It was something that was done in partnership with lots of people buying into the concept of an organization that was actually creating standards. And, we're not backed by any governments. We're not, don't have any sort of formal backing in terms of how we became the governing body. Now, I'll make you laugh. You know that moment in church when the priest gets up and says, "Does anyone object to this marriage or forever keep your peace?" Well, we've been doing that for 5 years. We'll get to a stage and we'll say, "Does anyone object that we're this?" And no one would object. And then we would go on a little bit further. And does anyone object? And no one would object. And we would grow a bit further. And that's how we grew to become the governing body, where we don't have any formal government approval from one country. The approval comes from the fact that we've registered that many coaches into the system. We've accredited that many training providers into the system. We've worked in partnership with that many people internationally, where, gyms in Canada or in Saudi or in the UK or Thailand are accepting the certificates from our accredited training providers. They're accepting what we would call a verified coach. So we have a system where it's a freemium model, pretty much like the Facebook, Instagram type models, where you can register on our directory for free. And then if you want to get verified, there's a very small charge to become verified. So you get your blue tick. So with that verified coach document, what we do is that we obviously, in order to get registered in the first place, we've had a couple of registrations today. Obviously, we have to do background checks before we approve them onto our directory, that they actually are who they say. They're actually operating in the industry. And once they get past the tier that we would call harmony, then they are officially allowed to be registered into our ecosystem. And then they can remain a free member for as long as they want. We don't say they have to get verified, but if they wanted to verify themselves, then they would provide us with the soft copies of their documents, their identity documents, ID photos, and who they are. And then we can run it through, well, everyone's using AI now. So we built an AI tool called the FCS system. And the FCS system will assess all the documents against the FAQ, but also against global standards. Because, for example, if you were to give us a certificate from a training provider that is not one of our in-house ones, we would need to go and verify that document against that training provider, and then check what level that particular document is on the international scale. So it was a very manually intensive job. But with the advent of AI nowadays, that does help our accreditation panel a lot. It can run through the AI, obviously, with some human input to make sure that any adjustments. But one of the really good things about the AI is when there was a bit of human input on it, humanity makes you a little bit more lenient. But facts are facts. So we built something called the SPX, which is a sovereign point system. I think I mentioned previously, I've got a background in physics. So I have a very mathematical background. So there's a mathematical formula now that actually looks at every certificate and assign a certain amount of points, sovereign points, to every document. And then a certain amount of sovereign points are accredited towards your work experience. Today, I had an issue with like an international rugby player that has documents, but I checked globally that if you've actually played sports for your country at international level, then whilst it's not a vocational qualification, it can be accepted as a level 3 qualification, being an international sports player that have actually played verified for your country. So little things like that, I learned that today. And I was able to use that in her assessment along with her certificates, have more formal qualifications, but we were able to give some weight towards her international career in sports towards her assessment. So there are things where we are a little bit flexible, but the AI helps us a lot in terms of actually creating a mathematically foolproof, what we call absolute truth. 1 + 1 = 2. Now I can argue with you 1 + 1 = 11, but that's something else. That's a discussion for another day. But we use the absolute truth, which is 1 + 1 = 2 and not 11. So where we have to mathematically prove the standards, because I know fully well that some of the people will take a verified coach and apply for a job in Canada or in the Middle East, and those people there want to have absolute certainty that if they were verified by our organization in Africa, that we've done our job. So we're actually very, very tough on our people when it comes to verified coach, because we don't want to be in a situation where that document can be challenged in terms of its validity.
Okay, very interesting to see, and especially when you're talking about the framework. Of course, I'm kind of remembering the European framework we also have in fitness, like a European qualifications framework, and a little bit remembers me like on that, the thing that you're building there. And perhaps one thing that would be interesting to me, how many people you already verified through this process? How much people in Africa we are talking now?
At the moment, we've got different levels. We've got different figures actually, and I actually had to double check the figures the other day for another project altogether, because we're building an app. But basically, uh, we have about 1,200 fully registered members on the website, but we actually have the data for about 5,000 coaches in Africa. Between 5 to 10,000, actually, somewhere in between, that we have full or partial data on for our mailing lists, between all our WhatsApp, Telegram groups, social medias. And then there's a figure. Now, I have to explain this figure. The figure that we talk about, which people go, oh, wow, 100,000 coaches have been certified by one of our partners or the other. So that's an indirect figure. But don't forget, some of our training providers are not just in Africa as well. But if you were to total the number of coaches that have been trained by one of our accredited, it's far in excess of 100,000. But just for the sake of putting a figure of what we would call our reach, we use that figure of 100,000, but the more immediate reach, in terms of on a day-to-day basis, is in between 5 to 10,000. So it's a very interesting figure. So we did some research on this. We divide the market into what we would call the formal industry and the informal industry. Now, according to our information, there's about 40,000 formal certified coaches in Africa that would say that they're certified, they're working in employment, that you can actually verify and check up, where they're working and their certificates. So the fact that we've got about between 5 to 10,000 in our system is a significant portion of what we'd call the formal market in Africa, where they have some form of qualification and working in chains or places that can be verified. Now, interestingly enough, the informal market is bigger than 1 million. There's more than 1 million coaches in Africa, but they're operating in the Wild West. Now, the really interesting part of this research was we were told by a very large American training provider that we're currently working to actually, they're actually the biggest training provider in the world. And we were speaking with them and we're talking about accreditation, and we're almost done. And they mentioned to us that at the moment, globally, there's a massive shortage of personal trainers globally. 250,000 personal trainers globally, there's a shortage, of which in America only, there's, I think it's 75,000. That means there's jobs in gyms, chains of gyms or jobs that for personal trainers that the gyms can't actually fill. Yeah. So the only market globally, possibly with the exception of Asia, that actually has a surplus right now. We went on and checked it in Europe and then we checked it in Australia and it was true. They don't have enough personal trainers. And that's just personal trainers. That's not yoga trainers or Pilates, that's or fitness, group fitness exercise. Just personal trainers, there's a shortage globally. So that really brings into account where you, in fact, going back to what you said at the last frontier, and we see it actually happening in real time. Most of the trainers that are going into the Middle East right now are coming from Africa because the Middle East were recruiting coaches from Europe originally and a little bit from America. But if those markets don't have enough personal trainers to fulfill their own local market, yeah, the Middle East can't poach them. Yeah. So all of a sudden, everyone's thinking, well, where are we going to get personal trainers from? Now, I've just said we've got 1 million in Africa that aren't actually certified. There's a surplus. They don't have jobs per se, or they don't have the qualification. So that pipeline is almost what we call endless because there are too many coaches for the actual available jobs in Africa, which then leads on to the fact that we also know that the big chains are looking at Africa as a marketplace to expand. Some of the chains, the bigger chains that we've met the C-suite levels of a lot of them, and they saying that on average, some of the chains are opening up 300 gyms in 26 and 27. So one a day is the target for some of these bigger gyms. But the point is, yes, you may have the money to open them up and the financial capacity, but once you've opened up your one gym a day, you do need manpower. AI can't train people. Well, to a certain extent, it can. But you know, there's been a lot of cutbacks in the industry, but the realization that you need manpower to actually, you know, have them in these gyms. And then all of a sudden everyone's looking as to where this manpower is going to come from. So in terms of our reach, yes, the reach is an educational reach that have been trained by one ATP on another. But the real reach at the moment is somewhere between 5 to 10,000 people that are directly in our ecosystem, where we have all their details. And then I used to think we weren't doing a good job until I realized that 5 to 10,000 out of 40,000 is quite a big percentage of the official channel. And what we're finding that every day, literally every day, there's someone saying, I'm in Oman, I need certification, I can't get it. I'm already in Oman, and I need certification. And I'm like, well, you need to get fitness certifications before we can issue you verified coach. Now, another thing that we talked about earlier on is that a university degree might be a level 6 qualification, but you need a vocational qualification. So if your university degree was in human kinetics, you know, that's a relevant subject. Yeah. But if your university degree was in history, well, that's not a relevant subject for the industry. And even if you have a university degree, you're supposed to have some form of continuous professional development education, vocational education. So what we always say is that even if you got a more formalized university degree, we always want to see, fitness instructor. We want to see level one short courses. And we have a system where a level one course is 8 hours. A level two qualification is 30 hours. And I previously mentioned 80 hours for level three. Level four, incidentally, happens to be 240 hours. So within the first 1 to 4, no, 1 to 3, what we have a system is that if you were to do 10 level one courses at 8 hours, you can demonstrably prove to us that you've done 80 hours of training. Now, with that, as well as other work experience, if you could provide 80 hours of smaller educations, maybe level ones and level twos, then you could have a justification for being level three, because you can show us, I've done 10 courses. And what we find is that in Africa, it might be easier for them to do the smaller, them in bite sizes, rather than afford to do the one big course. The courses are cheaper anyway, but they may still not be able to afford it. So we allow you to have a certain amount of flexibility and build up your hours of training over several courses. But there's a massive, massive demand right now. Every single day we're getting people asking, either directly, either chains of gyms coming to look at Africa and saying, well, we've hired people from Africa, but we are looking at having something a lot more official. We don't technically work with them because that's a whole different kettle of fish altogether. But we know that there's a lot of interest in terms of people looking for qualified fitness instructors. So it's not necessarily going to come out of the 10, 5, 10, 15, 40,000 people. Yes, you can do that for a certain extent. At the moment, they're taking out of the 40,000. So there's almost like a brain drain going on at the moment, where those are the guys that already have qualification and they can apply for jobs globally. But sooner or later, we're going to find the same situation where there's not enough people to actually do the jobs locally in Africa. That prices are going to go up for supply and demand. And then people have to come into the system to fulfill the global demand. So yeah, it's very, very interesting in terms of the figures. I would say on average, most of the bigger organizations, let's say in Europe, have about minimum of 10,000 to about 100,000 members in their directories, whether national directories or continental directories. So we're not there yet. I don't pretend to be as big as Oz Active or Europe Active or some of the more mature training organizations in the US. But then again, we're a lot newer market, and there is a massive demand for fitness instructors or sports coaches in Africa. It's just we had to, in 2019, I actually said something to the coaches recently. I said, did any of you believe in 2020 when we said you need to get a piece of paper before you'll get a job? Because prior to that, they were all working without having certification. And no one believed it was going to be possible to regulate the industry. Some people did have certificates, but that was more of a personal thing. But pretty much I can confidently say you can't get a job in Africa, in any country in Africa now, if you're not certified. And to have done that in 5 years, I didn't even believe we could do it off the record. I thought we chewed too much. I thought we tried to take too big a bite. But I can proudly, pretty much confidently say that it's virtually impossible, because the the clients are switched on. No client wants to actually operate the way we always say. You wouldn't get on a plane with a pilot that is not certified. You wouldn't have a lawyer that's not certified represent you in court or go to a doctor that is not qualified. So why would you go to a fitness instructor or a sports coach? And the clients are getting that idea. They're asking, the clients are asking the coaches, well, where's your qualification? The gyms are saying, well, we've got to protect ourselves against liability. And so we need our coaches certified. To a certain extent, some people still bend the rules. Obviously, that is happening anyway. But as I said, I'm a mathematically minded person. If you look at what is called a curve, called an exponential growth curve, basically it's it's very flat for a very, very long time. And let's say percentage wise, only 1% will break that flat line. 99% of people will remain on that flat line. But if you broke through that 99%, then you get what is called exponential growth. I would say that Fit Africa International is about to enter its exponential growth stage where it's been flatlined and it feels like you're banging your head against the wall. It feels like, why aren't more people joining? Why aren't we doing a job? But I suppose with things, maybe sometimes when you're a bit too close, you don't see the bigger picture. And then all of a sudden, one day you wake up and you say, oh, what's going on here? And that's kind of what's currently happening, where it was almost an impossible task to do what we set out to do. And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and it's like gone sky high. And because in effect, you can't beat logic. It's logic that you need to be certified. You know, if you want to sit down here and argue as to the reasons why you shouldn't be certified and why you should be allowed to work without certification, you're going to lose the argument. Yeah. So if logic dictates that you must be certified, you must be registered, you must be certified, training providers have to be accredited because we've had the argument recently, oh, well, I didn't learn a lot from that training provider. Then our answer was, well, the training provider wasn't accredited in the first instance, you know. So if you didn't learn anything from that course, yes, it was just a worthless piece of paper. You're supposed to have learned from the course, and so there has to be an accreditor of the training providers that keep to the standards. And then if everyone's operating at the minimum of standards, then you know that regardless of whoever you get the qualification from, you're always going to get that minimum standard across everyone. But if you were to go out to an unaccredited training provider, don't be surprised when your fitness, your jobs or your trainers then say, well, no, we don't recognize this certificate, basically. So a lot of it comes down to, I think I haven't mentioned one thing, funny enough. It's very, very important. The fitness industry is the only industry in the world that is self-regulated. Yeah. France is the closest market to having government regulation. Some people sometimes in that same breath talk about South Africa, but they don't really have government regulation. The government are tough in other ways, but they don't get involved in the framework like the French government do. But even the French government there's a certain level where they don't go past. But they have a rule that you have to be certified, and the governments are the ones that sort of look at a lot of the training things to be and get the national qualification. But pretty much it's the only industry globally. There is no government department for fitness. There's no minister of fitness anywhere in the world. There might be a minister for sports, a minister for health, a minister for education, but you will always get knocked around those three government divisions. There is no government department in the UK or in Germany or in Nigeria or in Thailand that I'm the minister for fitness in this country. They will probably say you fall under sports, but really it isn't. It isn't. So the industry has grown up being self-regulated. We being this being a B2B podcast, they will understand a lot more about what I'm talking about rather than the B2C market. So it has grown up by having groups of powerful stakeholders coming together to regulate the industry. And that's how all the governing bodies have actually become a governing body in themselves. So we were just having to sort of do the same thing in Africa. As I said, yeah, to answer your question in a long-winded way, between 5 to 10,000 people on a daily direct, and on an indirect, a reach of approximately 100,000.
Yeah, that's a very impressive number, and I think it also shows the potential that is in the African market, because at the end it's a developing market. It will definitely raise, and as you also talked about, yeah, at the moment perhaps there is even an export of talents from the African market for example, the Middle East countries, but this also can change, and when we have a gap also in the African market, and prices could be raised. But let's take a look a little bit on the African fitness market, because I would be especially interested in the cultural side of the fitness market. But which also brings us to kind of your other baby besides the Fit Africa, the Safari Fitness. Your slogan at Safari Fitness is, as far as I know, "Get fit the African way." And in Europe, yeah, if we think about group trends, they come up and go. They mostly are US driven, to be honest. I think very less trends really come from Europe, perhaps EMS and all the
Hyrox.
ecosystem around Hyrox, for example, yeah, or the ecosystem around eGym. These are like kind of the one and only things that really come from Europe, and in this case, even especially from Germany. But most of the stuff comes from US. And Safari Fitness, from my opinion, has taken a completely different route. Yeah, it's building programs like Safari Dance, Safari Cardiotone around rich cultural rhythms like Afrobeats, and so on. And perhaps if you take a look a little bit at that, can you talk about why infusing local musical heritage and high energy social movement is such a powerful force for engagement in Africa? And is it perhaps also something that could happen around the globe and kind of globally trend perhaps in the future?
Yeah, thank you for this important thing and bringing it more personal back home to our actual personal brand where we started off, myself, my wife, and Umar, our business partner, who's based in Belgium. So, Safari Fitness, yes, our slogan is Get Fit the African Way. Just a little bit of background. Back in 2010, we moved back to Nigeria from the UK with my kids, and my wife was a fitness instructor. And she was one of the first Zumba instructors in Africa, if we're going to go back and be realistic in the podcast. But very, very early on, the music was very, very new and happening in Nigeria in particular, but what we would call the Afrobeat scene today. So a lot of the artists were just building up what was called Afrobeat. When we grew up in Africa, we had traditional music, but we listened a lot to American music, funny enough, as well. And then all of a sudden, culturally, this Afrobeat phenomenon started to kick off. So we started to grow. Then my wife was like, wow, this music is fantastic. It's really happening. I've got to get into this. So we created a brand called Fusion Fitness originally, because coming from more of a Latin background to a fusion of Africa and Latin and global structures. And then eventually we created Safari Fitness, Safari Dance being our marquee program. So we turned it opposite and said 70% African music, 30% international. Originally, it used to be the other way around, 70% international and 30% African. And then, when you create something, and even if there's a photocopy of a photocopy, you still recognize your actual handiwork. I would say pretty much all fitness brands in Africa today use the concept that my wife actually created back in 2010. And she may not be as braggy as me, but I recognize the format in pretty much all African brands as of today. So let's use Latin because, funny enough, Zumba being a very big brand and Les Mills being from Australia were the two biggest brands in group fitness and still are today. So Latin fitness was very popular and it still is. But then again, nowadays, things like high rocks and competitive sports group exercise is even more popular now. So going back to group fitness, in Latin, the way they move is very top heavy, very high up in terms of shoulders and high movements. But in Africa, our center of gravity is a lot lower. So when you're dancing to African music and rhythms and creating fitness programs, your center of gravity and your movement is totally different to the systems of movement in America or in Europe or even in Asia. So what we found was that, funny enough, we have a very high Lebanese expat community in Nigeria, as well as a big Indian community in Nigeria. So African food is very starchy. It's we eat well eba. It's grainy. It's very starchy. We call it swallow. Stews are very heavy in oil. When we first started fitness in Africa, the sign of wealth was a big fat stomach. And people laughed at me as to why you getting into fitness. It's not a business. It's your wife's business. There's no business in this. We and a couple of other people, a guy called Maja, he used to do corporate fitness, and we were doing physical fitnesses. And we were one of the first people to start, creating an industry out of it here in Nigeria. And then we saw the people doing similar things all across Africa as well. Nowadays, your health is your wealth. People do realize that a big belly is not a sign of wealth. You want to be fit and healthy. The joke, the perceived fat cat mentality is gone. But traditionally, it was really, really hard to get an African client fit. Really hard because of their food and because of their sedentary lifestyles. They would get, because it's hot in Africa, so you'd come into your air-conditioned house, your air-conditioned car, air-conditioned office. So, and you would eat heavy starchy food, which by the way is delicious. African food is really, really nice. We love food. Food and culture and music are our big exports. So we had to create a system that would literally slice through the disadvantages that we were in. And what we would find is that one of our Lebanese ladies would come, and in 3 months they would be shredded because they're using the same thing the same type of fitness we were using for our African clients, and it would absolutely shred them really quickly. In fact, unfortunately, we had a phenomenon that 6 months later they would all fall pregnant, and we would see them in a year after they gave birth. And it would be a joke, and we would say, "Oh my God, it's going to happen." But we culturally created a system of fitness in Africa. Now, going to sports, it's not blowing our trumpet when we do know that athletically speaking, Africans are quite gifted. So you only have to look at sports teams to see Africans doing very well. Whether they're playing for an African team or a team from another country, you will always see them in athletics, in football, in sports in general. So we know that athletics speaking, they're very naturally gifted. But so the way we train individually is quite intense. I remember this story when myself and my wife, we came back to the UK, and the very first class that we had, safari class that we had in the UK, at a hotel near Heathrow Airport, because it was quite close to us being able to jump on the flight back home to Nigeria. And we did African fitness for them. And she went full power. And we thought, yeah, it was a great class. Everyone was like, oh, fantastic. It was an amazing class. And we were like congratulating ourselves. The next class, no one came. No one came back. They were all scared. Yeah, they didn't tell us to our face, but obviously they went back home and no, seriously, no one came the next class. Yeah. And we're like, okay, I think we need to modify what we call ginger, the level of activity. So funny enough, because we had one foot in Europe and one foot in Africa, we started to modify the high level of fitness that was expected in Africa. So we even modified it even further. So we had a saying that if your grandmother can do safari, then we're doing the right job. So we took the moves and made it simplistic, very, very simple, so that anyone anywhere in the world could actually do it, but still using that same original high intensity that we created in Africa, but we had to modify it to become simple. Now, that's why when I say earlier on that we recognize our trait in all African fitness, most other brands still do the very high jump in. If you're in a fitness class in Uganda, you may even see them doing a cartwheel or spinning and doing backward flips off the wall. It's crazy. They're super, super fit in Uganda and they jump really high in Kenya and a lot of energy. But we had to sort of start to teach more even in the Fit Africa side of things, but even beginning with Safari Fitness, that it's not about performance. It's about doing moves that your clients can actually follow. Because if you look at in the fitness class, in the group exercise class, and your front row are doing it perfect, but your third or fourth row are lost, then you're not doing a good job in terms of keeping the class together. And so I would always, not being a fitness professional myself, I would always sit in the back row of a fitness class and I would watch everything. And then I would speak to my wife and say, well, that was happening there and this was happening there. And then we would then look at how, even if we were giving feedback to, we were guesting instruction in people's classes, we would then go, but did you notice that the back row was moving and you needed to change your moves like this, and you need to make your moves simpler? So one of the things that we actually created was that we have high energy, high what we call ginger, which is flair, artistic flair. You can dance, you can throw yourself, you can do funny, special moves. But the actual move itself is very, very, very basic. So what we do in African fitness is we hide the fitness in the dance or the fun. So, for example, it might be a dance class, but it might be a cardio tone class, and you're still dancing in the cardio tone class or the body tone or class or the flow class, because there's still natural movements. You still need to move and enjoy yourself. But if you make the move very, very simple, then anyone can do it, and then you can add your own flair on top. But if you make the move complicated, then very few people can actually do it. And then I will go into a Latin class and I can't do Latin. I lie, I can do Latin, but I want to put my flair on top of a complicated move, and then I can become disruptive in the class because I'm not a professional like my wife that can do it perfect. So you find that when you got complicated moves, complicated plus flair equals disruption. So that's how we've built the cultural side in fitness. You know, enjoy fitness. People let people forget that it's actually a fitness class. If you tell people, "Do you want to do hits?" They'll be running. Yeah, but if you add hit into a dance class, they love it. Yeah. So culturally speaking, we very gregarious people. We like a lot of fun. We like the social aspects of classes. Even though myself and my wife, because of Fit Africa, we've carried on doing our classes. Trisha's carried on doing her classes virtually because obviously we travel so much. So yes, you can use technology, but there is something about that personal interaction. And even through a screen, you have to be able to actually project that. But then in person, she loves in-person classes, events, big events, that kind of thing, where you can bring in that sort of feeling. I remember when we used to teach in very high-end clubs in the UK, and people would be very upright because fitness was seen to be something that you were there. You're German, and you go to a class and you're there, and you that very and that's amazing, fantastic. And I was always a disruptor in the class. I would go up into the clients and say, and I would disturb them because they would have a really straight face and we got to do this perfectly. And I would be like, and I would pretend as if I was, dying, out of breath. Oh my God, I'm dying. Oh my God, and people would start laughing. They would start laughing that, oh, look at this guy. And I'm like, I got you. You're laughing now, you see. You got to have fun in the fitness class. So fun is a very, very big part of culturally what we do in terms of fitness here, because that's what gets people to come to classes, to enjoy it. I mean, in terms of the point about in Europe and brands coming and going, another thing we do in Africa is we maybe it's just because of the numbers, but we've never been able to saturate our market. So by that I mean that if there are too many instructors operating in the market on their brand, more often than not, quality suffers. So that's why fast food joints, some have been more successful than others. And it's never about in franchising. When you do a franchising model, for example, you always want to walk into this a fast food place and have exactly the same quality everywhere. So, but in fitness, if you're licensing in group fitness and you don't have the same quality of class across all classes, then it does affect the brand. Now, maybe it's just we're lucky that we've never been able to saturate our market, but internally in Safari Fitness, we've always had a rule that we would never train too many instructors in the same area so that each instructor would have a reasonably large size market that they could operate in. A lot of these concepts, when we sit down and we talk in our training, people go, oh, wow, we don't do that here. And those were the concepts that we started to take into Fit Africa as well. We always had to build concepts that no one else was doing because we had to make it work for us. So yeah, in terms of everything to do with fitness, it's in Africa, our banking system became more advanced than the European banking systems because we were very prone to fraud back in the day. Well, I'm from Nigeria where we have a very bad reputation, but the guys of us that care about reputation, we have to work even harder to counteract the bad reputation that some Africa sometimes has. So, for example, in the banking system, we used to get alerts from our apps and texts 10, 15 years ago. And I'll go back to the UK and I'll be like, the banking system in the UK is not as advanced as the one we have in Africa. So what we tend to do is we tend to leap and take steps where if we were behind today, tomorrow we'll miss out a couple of steps and we'll do something and sometimes be even ahead of the rest of the market. The rest of the market starts playing catch up. So culturally, even that, the music nowadays, I mean, I remember when we first went back to the UK and all of a sudden on the radio, there was African music, Afrobeats, and then we knew something was happening. And these were people that we used to, I mean, obviously Nigeria is a very small place. I mean, we know that we would meet the musicians in Nigeria. And some of them started actually creating songs specifically for Safari Fitness for us and get it indirectly to us through my sister. My sister is very connected in the music industry. And all of a sudden we get this song, but can you play that song in your class? You know, and then we would play it. And then all of a sudden we would find that someone was dancing the same routine in I don't know, Estonia. And we'll be like, okay, there's something now. Nowadays, uh, African movies on Netflix, they're very, very popular, not just with Africans. African music is very, very popular globally. So culturally speaking, people speak Yoruba, which is the Nigerian language, or Swahili. Why? Because they've been listening to a song that has the words in it. So the word Jo means dance. And people are singing a Wizkid or Davido song, and they will say a bit of Nigerian language in it or Swahili or something like that. Subconsciously, people are learning the language from the songs that they're actually listening to. So same thing with the African dance fitness or cardio fitness. Moves have been introduced that they're African, but you will see Asian people dancing in African styles on TikTok, but it's an African move. So pretty much the world's sort of getting sort of smaller as we speak, and culturally we're mixing, and African culture is becoming more and more important as we go on. And yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, it answers the question definitely. So thank you very much for sharing all this information. One thing I would like to take a little bit a closer look on, because we're very much talking now about classes, about kind of dance fitness, and so on. And especially for me, where coming from Central Europe, I'm very much used to going to the gym, putting my overheads on, doing my training mostly alone. Perhaps sometimes it's where, but I speak to a few minutes. But when going back to my own training and doing this kind of very single, all alone training session for myself. From everything I heard until now, it sounds a little bit like that African consumers look for a much more expressive communal gym experience when compared to our Central Europe kind of training. Is that true?
Very, very, very true. Even in the group, I mean, I mentioned it, even originally in group fitness, it's very singular. Training is quite singular in Europe, but that's why at the moment the trend is moving towards combative group exercise. Because group exercise, if you went to FIBO 5 to 10 years ago, group exercise was massive. If you were to go to FIBO this year or last year, you would find that pretty much it was Hyrox and a few other brands. And group fitness is pretty much not in the scene today. So a lot of gyms are catering these concepts about strength training, very much individualized personal type training programs for people, having the right equipment for them. But conversely, in Africa, group exercise and that communal side of it, I suppose, yes, in using your own words, in Europe, they would be classified more of a boutique type gym, but those are the mainstream gyms in Africa. Even in the actual gym itself with the machine, they're busy bantering. Some fitness people are busy doing social media posts about themselves, and it's all about the social aspect of training. It's all about the camaraderie. It's all about no one wants to go to the gym alone. No one wants to go to the gym. It's where to meet friends. It's where to meet your gym buddies and train together. So we have a very vastly different culture. But for example, I mean, talking back about Safari Fitness, we run Safari Fitness. We have fitness instructors in Europe, and they bring that group exercise mentality and fun into the classes in Europe. And you see the clients going out happy, you know. And the first thing we say is it doesn't matter. It's okay. It's African, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to be able to know how to do an African dance move. If you're going left and everyone's going right, it doesn't matter. We don't judge you. It's a judgment-free zone here. You can do every single move wrong. I'll be the biggest joker in the class. I will say I've been doing it for nearly 10, 15 years, and I still get it wrong. So it doesn't matter. And once people hear that, all of a sudden they go, oh, okay, there's no judgment in here. No one's judging anyone, and it's just a fun class, but with structure. So you can't take it to the point where there was this trend in boutique where you were you allowed the client to dictate because there was almost a backlash of the structural class where, in fact, the clients dictated how their program would be. And we were like, nah, that can't work. You have to have structure from the instructor or the coach. So I think there's also, that going backwards as well. So it's finding that happy medium of structure, but allowing people to be less rigid, so to speak.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, thank you very much for these insights into the market. But let's also talk a little bit about the technology and the infrastructure. I mean, here in the West, the Western Europe, Central Europe, fitness tech usually assumes high wealth users with uninterrupted high-speed connection, and also, of course, yeah, normally used credit cards or other payment methods we're used to, like PayPal or so. But your platform ecosystem, especially the Fit Africa app, takes a radical localized approach. It's built mobile first, it's low bandwidth, and it integrates local payment methods that, of course, as a European, I think I did never heard of in many cases, like mobile money, Paystack, and something like that. How critical is this low bandwidth local payment paradigm if you want to scale digital fitness businesses across the African continent?
Wow. You really have done your research. I must say, I will commend you. You say, okay, you don't, but in terms of, researching before this podcast, you really have gone in a lot. Yes, earlier on, I talked about a lot of things where sometimes we've had to build systems because no one else was doing it. Sometimes at great loss. The strange thing is we never built Fit Africa International to be profit making, whilst Safari was a profit making orientated business. But then I had mentioned that we paused it to build Fit Africa and never looked at it as profit driven, because the only way it was going to be built was to take loss for a number of years. As I said, the 99 flat curve before the exponential growth. Now, obviously, the Fit Africa app is part of the exponential growth side of things, but then again, it also has to be built with the localized market in mind. So we've had a lot of people that have reached out to us that are very interested in launching apps in Africa, and we always open to working with them as well. And I've always done so, and because we're very connected into the international market. However, one of the biggest problems most people have is to do with the localized payment systems, as you mentioned, the high-speed connections, the mobile systems. Stripe, for example, PayPal, those type of payment systems. I remember being in Singapore years ago, and a friend of ours who's very close to us now, from Australia, talked to one of the biggest payment providers for the fitness industry in the world. And he said, are you guys interested in working with these guys in Africa? And the answer was, hell no, we don't want to work with them, because they couldn't, it was too big a risk. And our friend Cameron said to us, don't worry, in a few years' time, they'll come asking for you. And I always remember that. And well, full circle now. Yes, the problem with localized mobile money. In Nigeria, we have a very advanced banking system, but it's internal. It's an internal banking system and isn't necessarily that well connected to the outside world. South Africa is actually quite well connected in terms of international payment systems. But as you said, that's a mature market that also is self-serving. But some of the international payment systems do work there. And so most international companies have gone into South Africa as an easy first step into Africa. Incidentally, South Africa also happens to be the most profitable market for any fitness business, return on investment anywhere in the world. So the question we always get asked is, oh, what about South Africa? But we always say, yes, well, South Africa is a very good market, but it's one of 54 markets. So you can't base your whole Africa strategy on one country. It's like saying you're basing your European strategy just based on Germany alone. It doesn't work. You have to think about all the countries in the EU. So in terms of East Africa, especially mobile money, M-Pesa, Momo, MTN, Momo, those are pretty much the de facto banking systems. There are other banking systems in North Africa, and they're not interconnected. Now, though I say that there's an African banking system that is being talked about where payment systems can work borderless across Africa. But generally speaking, if you wanted to make a payment in Uganda with a Nigerian card, if the card was able to work in the first instance, the transaction would normally be done in dollars. So there's a lot of wastage in terms of the conversion rates and all of that. So the payment systems in Africa have never been conducive to technology. So knowing that, and with the vast base that we had and our knowledge of traveling and payment systems and how to move, across things, and the need for, we talked about the brain drain, but we did research, and a lot of coaches would prefer to be able to stay in their local market but earn more. So what we looked at was a system where, much like your marketplace apps, I shan't mention any names, but your food or your taxi services, where you could go on a marketplace, find a coach, connect, make payments through the app, and the coaches would receive their money, less commission for the app. They don't have to worry about the technology behind it. Also to help professionalize them by helping them create programs for their clients, individualized programs where the app can help them generate all of that. Let's say a coach had a client that they would see twice a week, but you would want to set them programs for the remaining 3 days of the week whilst they're at home. But they needed the technology to be able to do that. Well, all that's perfectly well and good if you were to use a Western app that has all those features. But if the payment systems can't go through them, then that's the blockage there. So hence the reason why we started to build, and we'll be launching well, we're here in Nigeria, and we're filming some basic exercises for the app yesterday and the last 2 days, demonstration videos. So yeah, it's highly exciting. And when I talked about the exponential growth, these are the things that, in terms of financially, they can be financial returns, both for ourselves as the creators of Fit Africa Safari Fitness, but also for the actual coaches themselves. But it's a long time coming. It's My wife calls me a madman for having such a long-term view. But sometimes you have to take it, you needed to take a 5 to 10 year view and then take a massive leap when you see it. And what we always look at is that a problem is not a problem. It's actually it as an opportunity to solve the problem. So, for example, as I said, with the low bandwidth, the local payment systems, that was the barrier for others. But if you could solve the problem, then it becomes an opportunity. And some of the Western technology apps for food delivery or taxi services that have become successful in Africa have done so because they may not be even that big in their own home country, but they solved the problem locally in Africa. And then all of a sudden, bam, they blew up. So we looked at it and said, well, someone's going to do it eventually. Someone with a lot deeper pockets than we do have. But let's start first. Because the advantage that we have is that we had the coaches, we have the trainers, we have the clients, the background in clients as well. So we pretty much worked in every part of the business, so to speak. Now, I also happen to mention that I'm a businessman myself as well, and I've got a technology background. I used to sell home entertainment systems. In fact, I sold NASA their first ever multi-region DVD player. So I do tend to know a little bit about technology as well. So hence the reason why we came in and started to develop the app. Well, we'll see. It's exciting. We've seen how that's going to go, but I think that's what brings everything together. Now, strangely enough, we will always ask the question when we travel because we're traveling globally we haven't been to any conferences this year on purpose because literally it was just one conference to the other. 1 minute you're in Saudi, the next you're in Singapore, the next you're in Spain or in America or in the UK or Turkey or wherever you are in the world or South Africa. Now, yeah, we basically took this year to sort of build what we felt was going to bring everything that we've actually done in the industry together under the app. Now, we had actually been told, whenever we'd go to the conferences, how many boxes do you have? I.e., boxes being units. How many gyms do we have? And we would say exactly 0. And I was like, what? Because obviously the industry was conditioned to actually think about big box or small box gyms, number of units, or you were either in the regulatory side of it or you were in the actual other side, which was actually the fitness. And we could never place, but you're in both, but you don't have any gyms. And we said, yes, because we knew that what we were trying to do was get in effect, the most valuable commodity was actually the network itself, the human resource. There were times when we wondered whether we took the wrong step. Fitness chains have come up in Nigeria and other countries in Africa. And we will ask, oh, but those guys are opening up gyms and you guys aren't. But we looked at it totally different. In as much as that was always going to be a very obviously profitable thing to have done with our background in Safari Fitness. Back in 2020, we were at the crossroads, 21. And do we go back 21, 22? Do we go back into opening gyms, that was the natural step then. But we said, no, let's go for a harder route, which is to create the network. It would be a lot harder financially. There would be no immediate return. But if you were to do it and get the network, then you could create solutions based around the network, which is where the app is a digital solution, where we're not necessarily saying that we were not going to go into actual physical gyms, but if you control the digital solution. In Africa, I normally say, with the advent of the hail riding apps, the traditional black cab or taxi business is dead, basically, because no one goes out onto the street to hail a taxi anymore. You do it from your phone. So actually, in Africa, we're very mobile heavy. We're even more mobile heavy than we are in the rest of the world. We're very dependent on low bandwidth, fast solutions that work well with your mobile phone system. In East Africa, I would argue their mobile money system is even more advanced than the banking system, because literally it's a wallet that would traditionally have been your mobile phone credit. Yeah. So the way you would load up credit onto your phone, but that becomes money, and it's a bartering system where I can send you money through my mobile phone credit. It's a wallet on my phone, and I'll send you money through M-Pesa or Momo, and it gains value because then I can then trade it. So most of the time you don't actually need to hold any form of cash, but obviously you can actually you can convert it into cash. So a lot of experiments in terms of what we'll call cashless society, what happened actually in Africa, because they were unbanked. So if we were going to create a solution that works, then we had to look at a mobile first strategy that solved the primary problem, which was the payment systems, and was able to connect coaches even in remote areas to clients anywhere in the world.
Okay, very interesting. We already see there is much happening in the African market that perhaps affects us here more when we know, especially with this examples you just gave us, where already much experiments in special areas are going on there. We already talked very long, but I don't want to let you go until one last question I have for you. And this would be a little bit the outlook for everything. We already talked about the status now, how Africa is separated in different regions for the fitness market, how gym fitness products, especially like group classes, are very important on the market. But I would also be interested into looking forward, looking into the next few years. Where do you see the biggest investment opportunities? Is it in digital scaling? Is it physical boutique studios or large-scale infrastructure? Where do you see the market in the future in Africa?
This is a very interesting question, because even though I talked about we are going digital, I actually see a very massive opportunity for large-scale infrastructure, large-scale gyms in Africa. We've done the financing. I can actually even mention it here. It would be relatively a lot cheaper to roll out a chain of gyms, and I wouldn't be wanting to give any competitors ideas, but the figures that you're talking about are between 80 to $100 million. With that, you could roll out a chain of gyms all across Africa. As I said, we did the actual figures. So whilst there's also an opportunity for small boutique gyms, we've looked at those options as well with other people, and that's the de facto. That's what's actually happening today. There's no large scale gyms. There's lots of smaller boutiques. There's people that have two or three gyms. There's some chains that have about 20 to 40 gyms, but there's no chain that has gyms in multiple countries in Africa or hundreds of gyms, basically. So, but those things require very, very deep pockets. As I said, you're going to need minimum of $100 million to sort of roll out those sort of projects. But as I mentioned earlier, South Africa return on investment is the highest in the world for any fitness business. So there's an opportunity for people to go into it. But we looked at the Asian market as well, or the Middle East, and we said, well, also technology is a way forward as well. To because a lot of people talk about China as being low wages, and that's been one of the things that have uh, uh, meant that their businesses and industry has grown because of the low cost of labor. Well, Africa also has low cost of labor, yeah, uh, but it's also so if there's only one market globally that can challenge China in terms of low cost wage, and that's actually Africa. So you have to look at it that you have to pick your battle, so to speak. If you're a large scale chain and you want to do that, then you know your particular battle. That's what you do. If you wanted to create smaller boutique gyms, that's your battle. Uh, or you take the high tech, low cost method or technology route. Our heart tells us the big box gym is the way. Yeah, or the boutique. Our heart tells us. All throughout this conversation, I talked about the phys the personal relationships of fitness and Safari of Fit Africa. I talked to about 1,000 people a month. That connection. I can talk to C-suite. I can talk to people on the ground. It doesn't matter where you are in the industry. We love that interaction. So with all of that based, there I'm talking about high-tech solution. Our brain tells us the high-tech solution is the way forward, even though the heart is in that chain of gyms, yeah, the boutique one. The boutique one would be where I would say my heart would be. The money would be in a large scale chain coming in, but our brain is telling us go high tech.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, we see there is a very interesting view in the future on the African market, and I think we also have covered an extraordinary amount of ground today. We learned so much about this market, and I want to thank you very much for taking the time to guide us through this inspiring work and the broader African fitness ecosystem today. For our listeners, if you want to connect with Akinola, learn more about a governing framework of FIT Africa International, or explore the global rhythms programs of Safari Fitness, you of course find all the links and contact details right in the show notes. So don't wait to get in contact, for example, on LinkedIn, or come into one of its groups. Like he already said, the WhatsApp group, Telegram group, and so on. Very interesting channels that I also follow. So don't wait to join them. And now I have also a small favor to ask you. If you found these global insights valuable, please share this episode with colleague, your business partner, or your management team. As I always say, sharing is the applause of the podcaster. It helps us grow our community and continue providing these global industry insights for free. Thank you very much for your incredible support. Now, following our long-standing tradition from the German podcast, the final words of the podcast belong to my guest. Akinola, looking at the future connection between the global fitness industry and the booming African market, what is the one message you want to leave our audience with?
First of all, I want to really take the time to thank you, Andreas. This has been such a wonderful experience, partly because of the fact that you were so well prepared and are taking your time to actually research the market and what we're actually doing, first of all. And I think even though you sort of said it's, wasn't your strength, it's a real testament to yourself and this podcast, the amount of background information that you've already done on the market, which made the podcast a lot easier for us and hopefully for the listeners themselves as well to understand the market. So thank you so much for that. I once had an argument with the very high up person in Europe Active that Africa would basically be the leading industry in the fitness industry, markets in the fitness industry. We're very good friends now, but we always laugh about the argument we had once. But I'll leave that last message in case he listens to this podcast, just to remind him that I did tell him that Africa was going to become the biggest market in the fitness industry globally one day.
Thank you, Akinola. And to everyone out there, see you next time on Hashtag Fitness Industry. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.